Welcome back, everyone, to another episode. Today, we are speaking with Jahmaal Marshall. Jahmaal is founder and CEO of Listen Then Speak LLC. He is a certified counselor, public speaker, podcast host, and mentor, and he tackles burnout, codependency, and people pleasing at the root with proven methods to 2 times your time and maximize productivity. Jahmaal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Enrique. It's good to see you, brother.
Yeah, same here. I've been anxious for this episode because, folks, yes, we just went out of January. Here we are in February. But I tell you, I've already seen many reports of those that started with a great plan in January and are already burned out. And so we will be speaking about leading through burnout and navigating challenges and cultivating resilience. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about you, brother.
Well, for those who don't know me, I live in Washington, D.C. Uh, I've been a counselor since 2013. I've been training for the 16 plus years in human behavior. And I've combined the counseling with some coaching techniques because, with the coaching, it can be more cheerleading. The counseling, it can be more chair time. And I think it's important to combine the two so that you can actually give a person effective results. Talk therapy itself is limited in its effectiveness, and sometimes coaching can be limited in its effectiveness. So I think you need a combination of isolating root causes, but also understanding that there's a process and a process that gives a person results that they care about. I also give homework to make sure that the progress is measured. I'm also a podcast host. The podcast is called Listen Then Speak, and I do public speaking and mentoring. And one thing that people always say, what's your differentiator? Well, other than somebody who just started in COVID, I've been doing this for years. So with 16 plus years in human experience, with a myriad of clientele, you get to really understand what the root causes are. And if you don't isolate those, you just stay in a cycle, and that cycle doesn't stop. So that's just a little bit about me, brother.
Outstanding. And folks, as we're talking about root causes, a lot of times, Jahmaal, what happens is that we fail to see the signs, either by omission, like we should put it away and don't think about it, or we're just so downright bogged down with what we do that we just miss that. So, what are the key signs and symptoms of burnout in leaders, and how can they be recognized early on?
Yeah, so delving into that, it's going to look a little different, even gender wise. It's going to look different in men than it does in women. And I'll start with the ladies first. So, in ladies, it may look like taking on not just a lot on at the work, but also a lot in home front. A lot of times, women are called to be the social barometer of the house, the friend group, the community group, and mostly, there are a lot of guy empaths too. I'm one of them myself, but with them carrying so much, they also carry that into work. Uh, Also, with a lot of women, because I have 60% female clients, many of them feel that in meetings, if they're not carrying themselves a certain way, then they may be seen as aggressive, or they may be seen as, why didn't she say anything, or maybe she should be a little bit quieter. So burnout often looks like overextension in areas where it's not warranted. And in female leaders, a lot of times they'll put pressure on themselves to do the work that their team should do. So I would say lack of delegation is one. Sometimes, depending on the personality type, irritability, because when you're carrying so much, there's going to be resentment building up. Two, also, not only not delegating to your staff, but also in leaders, probably giving them a little too much because there's pressure over your head. And so burnout a lot of times there's a root cause there of not communicating what your need is to your leaders. And so most times it's stockpiling. Another sign of burnout can be excessive weight gain over a very short period of time. Another sign of burnout can be, in a lot of different cases with both male and female, neglecting one's health, neglecting home front, uh, and neglecting the basic necessities. What we do in the day to day. And really, myself in the past, I was like the first to come, last to leave. Um, Overwork and overextension, those are just a couple of signs. But a lot of times, a person, it's really the internal work. What's going on in the internal belief system that is actually fueling why you're burning the candle at ends that don't exist. So that's just a couple of the signs, but it can be a little different in men and women because our minds function differently, and especially with guys, if there's more of a fear of delegation of I'm going to take that on myself, they'll find themselves taking the work that should be owned by other teams or other people, uh, and so really, it deep down, and the root of it is fear, and that fear of rejection is really deep when it comes to burnout, because we're taking in so much information. We are in the age of information, and we have to be careful about how we process intel. Sorry about those sounds of DC you're hearing in the background.
Well, it is the city life. So
Oh my goodness.
I grew up in the Bronx. I should know that's easy. That's normal ambient noise, really. Uh,
Pretty
but,
much.
but folks, when we talk about burnout and we're trying to decide what how it's actually playing with us, we also have to remember. And you mentioned something there that actually affected me. A supervisor was getting burned out and they were overloaded and they just chose to pass it on. And it was coming down on me. And then I began to exhibit some of those internal and external, because it
Hmm.
came out that way, as a team member. So I wanted to ask you, what strategies can leaders employ to prevent burnout among themselves and their teams, because both have the value?
One of the things I want to say is oftentimes crap has to hit the fan before there's a commitment to psychological safety. Many times leaders have to see a problem, and I would say with the first strategy is to understand what's going on. Just like those of us in business, you want to post survey your audience to find out, well, what is marketable, what's useful, what's not working, what is working. Basic lessons learned after project management. And I would say survey the staff and survey a very large pool of staff to figure out what is the need and what is going on. And a lot of times take some time to actually use your I think they call it EAP. It depends on the organization you're with, to, even if that's not who you want to stay with, just to get a pulse on where you are. And if you're seeing that many things as far as psychological safety is in the red, staff don't feel safe, staff don't feel honored, people are actually starting to turn over. If you're looking even through your HR department at high rates of turnover within the company, I would say look at things like that and then make a decision. Okay, like I think we want to bring in a consultant. We want to bring in someone to be committed to psychological safety and wellness. That's one of the first strategies. And I would say one of the more simple strategies is really focus on the one on ones. I think a lot of times people tend to rush through that. It's like, oh, let me just get through this 30 minutes or this hour because I have to do it. But get a pulse on where your staff is. And even in your own one on ones, you know, come fearless. Now, it depends on the rapport you may have. You and I both own our own businesses, but we've also worked in a professional environment. I've always been grateful to be in positions where I've had managers I can be really open with. And so don't really just take that time just to talk about the projects you're doing. Talk about your own mental health and wellness, because the mind is a control tower to the body. Our head's going to inform our heart and our heart's going to inform our head. If there's dysfunction there, you're going to find yourself in a place where you're not sustainable. So I would say those are two strategies: focus on the one-on-ones, and then get an actual pulse survey out of a large pool, large percentage of your staff, to get a feel for where they really are, and let them know. Continue to reaffirm safety for them, because a lot of times you get skewed results if people don't feel safe. And once you implement those two, the one-on-ones and then some surveying, then you can move to the third strategy of actually bringing someone in. A lot of times, just like in our families, when your uncle says something and you're like, oh, I get it, and your dad and mom have been saying it for years, sometimes a person from the outside may have a little bit more pull and authority to speak to a situation and put strategy to it than someone that's on the inside. I hope that's helpful.
Oh, absolutely. And as you were talking about that, it reminded about my wife that, oh, somebody else had to tell you, right? It's always like that. Sometimes it requires an external person to come in and teach you or say something that will click. So, wonderful advice. Now, when we're talking about that mental capacity or that mental place of well-being, that safe zone, we're all looking for that in some way, shape, or another. But we first have to implement those things for ourselves. Our
Mhm.
well-being is not someone else's responsibility; it's
Right.
ours. So how can leaders effectively balance their personal well-being with the demands of their professional roles?
Great question, Enrique. One of the biggest things is understanding for yourself. One of the books I coach through is Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, Steve Covey. And it's one of my favorite quotes. It says, begin with the end in mind. And so actually sitting with yourself and asking, what does the end of this look like for myself? And understanding a lot of times we're on the run. We're in the age of information. And so we're getting so much information. We're also disseminating a lot of information. Taking time to pause. One of the phrases I've coined is that the problem is in the pattern, but the power is in the pause. Pausing and sitting with yourself and taking inventory of where you really are. And then understanding your capacity, especially for both male and female leaders that take on so much. It's like, I think sometimes we think the moment I put on a pair of loafers or ladies, a pair of heels, then I walk through this door and I'm a different person. You bring yourself, you bring your family history, you bring your belief system, you bring your psychology, you bring all of those things with you through the door. And taking the time to say, okay, if I want to be an effective leader, I need to be mentally, spiritually, psychologically healthy in order to manage myself. Well, let's take the NT off management. Before I manage, I need to manage me because they're watching me. You're getting management, you're getting people watching you from below and watching you from above. And if you cannot yet manage yourself, you're going to find that it's extremely problematic. And so I would say in taking strategies, to prevent burnout, get honest with yourself. And that's the tough part for all of it. I mean, even before I became a counselor, I went through counseling. I had to get gut level honest with me and say, okay, wait a minute. There are actually some low hanging fruit that's been in your life for years that you need to deal with. And when you do that, then you find that you develop a trigger awareness for what actually triggers me to overextend. And then what can I do to mitigate that? But it doesn't happen overnight. I hope that's helpful.
Oh yeah, it's not an overnight job for sure. It didn't take, yeah, just think about it. If you happen to be any like between 20, 30, 40, it took that many years to get you there. So imagine how much work you must have to put in to get you where you should be. Now, talking about focusing on you, making sure you're right for not only yourself, but the environment you're putting yourself in, the role of and positions organizations play in the overall burnout scenario. It's not something that's just singular. Organizations also have a role to play in burnout, especially in that climate or that organization.
Mhm.
So, what role does organizational culture play in either mitigating or exacerbating burnout among leaders and their teams?
Oh, you're getting into it now. The organization plays a huge role. And for, let's just say, top C suite leaders, if you're not paying attention to your bottom line and your middle managers, you're actually shooting yourself in the foot because these are, lack of better rhetoric, the workhorses of your organization. Uh, Understanding, not just hearing their feedback in a recall meeting, not just going through employee engagement surveys and ignoring them, pay attention to that data. A lot of times that data is screaming year after year and nothing is done about it. And, C-suite leaders are typically the ones who get all the credit for the work, but there's a lot of workhorses. There's layers, pyramids of layers of people that are putting their heart and their soul into what goes into the organization. And so, from a work culture standpoint, if leaders continue to ignore that, then they squeeze, those who are committed to the mission. I call it killing your golden gooses. And I've been in a couple of organizations that unfortunately kill some of the people who are committed to the mission, who are there, who are mission minded, who have bought into everything the organization has done, and really left underappreciated, underpaid, overworked. And so I would say from a cultural standpoint, look at the data and then look at where your turnover is happening. Because a lot of times with leaders, sometimes the only thing that speaks to them is number. And if you see that you have high turnover, that's one of the things that I do when I do consulting with teams. It's costing you $10,000 to $24,000 every time you onboard a new employee. So that's money that is walking out the door. And not only that, this institutional knowledge. And so when you say, okay, we have a problem here, and I don't want to continue to have these problems. I want a company of thrivers and not just survivors. Then you're willing to actually bring in people to do something about it and willing to actually check in with your staff. And I would say for leaders, top level leaders and middle level leaders, make yourself accessible to your staff, not in a way that burns you out, that gives people too much access, but be personable. You don't want to be just a face, because that doesn't engender trust. And where trust isn't engendered, you have people who are just there and who are just taking up space. They're actually, instead of using their lunch breaks to kind of ideate through systems and processes and projects of like how do we move the organization forward, they're using their lunch breaks to look for another job. Is that the problem that you want to keep having? And if that's a problem that you're having, bring someone in to mitigate that problem, but also not just to speak to check the box and say, okay, we brought a consultant in, but to actually speak to the minds and hearts, because the true work is internal from top to bottom.
And I wish that the lunch thing was a normal. They're probably doing it all day long. So if you got a community organization that's bringing in burnout as a normal thing, they probably looking for a job all day long. And whether they should be doing it or not, that's besides the point. They're ready to go.
And Enrique, let's back up real quick, just between you and I. Let's think about, I'm nearly 40. I can sneeze and I'll be 40. So I still come from that generation where I'm very loyal. I started my career as an 18-year-old at the Department of Justice, Federal Bureau of Prisons. So it's like I was there for almost 7 years. It's like any job I've had, I've typically been nearly 7, 8 years. I just stay in. But you don't have that these days, especially with this, newer millennials and Gen Zers. They're ready to get out of there. And I know that, the older generation, the Xers and the older millennials will say, okay, well, you kind of have a sense of entitlement. But people are like, if they're going to come and give you their best, and they already got a bunch of student loans to pay back, you can't just, the culture is very different now. And so just as we have to adjust, leaders need to adjust as well, not adjust to, in a sense, catering and pandering, because then you'll end up with a work culture that is not balanced, but be very present to understand the need and the pulse of your organization. And so if leaders in a sense are checked out from their people are going to be checked out from their job. And then the problem just it's a nasty cycle. Go ahead.
Yeah, nasty cycle indeed. A lot of that is mitigated often with communication. And whatever you communicate is what gets promulgated, right? You could do something, no, somebody not know, but you say something and let somebody hear it. It's going to go out. So, in taking communication as one of those key elements that leaders have to get their places right, how can leaders foster a culture of open communication and support to address burnout proactively within their teams?
Let's go back to where we started. Definitely survey, because you don't want to speak to a problem that's not there, and you don't want to make something out of nothing. So get to understand, just like when we who run business do market research, understand what the problem is so you can speak to the problem. And then also for leaders, depending on your locality, speak to the problem in a way that's culturally nuanced. Everyone is not the same. Everyone, you have different genders, you have different ethnicities, and burnout for one person is going to look different from the next. And so understand, you want to actually have a team of people who can inform you, and also a board prayerfully that can inform you about how your message is going out, how you're communicating that, so that everyone feels seen and heard. And it could be a headache of a high degree. I'm not saying that like this is easy. It's not an easy issue, but it's not going to be easy to come out of. Be committed to the hard work. If you value your staff and you want your staff in turn to value you, be committed to communicating that we want to tackle this as an organization, that I want to see you all win. I value you all. And when people just even hear that, what it does for morale, what it does from a project management standpoint, the what it does to the numbers, to the bottom line, and not just when people feel value, but when they know they're valued. You know, we have a saying in my old neighborhood. I can show you better than I can tell you. You got to show folks that they're valued, and putting activities that are outside of work, highlighting who they are offline, not just who you are when you come here. Like, I see you all as more than objects of productivity, and I'm training, make sure for leaders, you train managers to understand how to train and how to corral their staff, and even budgeting for time on the clock, when they can get out of work for their own psychological safety. I'm not talking about pizza and foosball, but like stuff that actually promotes psychological safety, promotes wellness, promotes actually just getting out and getting some vitamin D. Let's go bowling. Let's let's see a movie. It's just those little simple things, you know, and also a culture where people don't feel like I have to be a certain way. And I'm not going to get into that because that's not the type of conversation we're having. But a lot of times, I think from a DEI standpoint, things seem to be forced. There's a really good TikTok meme where it has a bunch of uh, pigeons of different colors. It's all, still siloed to their areas. Don't try to force it. You know, things happen organically over time, but put the message out there that as an organization, we're committed to this. Anything that's forced, people are going to rebel against. But when there's a need and when you survey for the need, and you're looking to meet the need, that's when you have a winning formula.
As leaders, find out first if you have an issue, because you might not. And just for the sake of, chiming in to the latest news, you may create one if you're not careful. So find out if you have an issue and then address the issue wisely. One of the things I used to hate, and I still kind of do not like this, is when a leader will come in the room and just spray everybody with information, and I'm like, that's not even down my alley. What did you just say, and why? You called us all together and made this massive blast, and it only actually dealt with one or two people in here. So why don't you just individually go talk to them, right? And so as leaders, we think that that approach will handle all the issues. All right, I'll let everybody know. Well, you got to know if there's a problem and then know how to address it. So I love that. Now, we've talked a lot about other people, leaders and communities, how organizations, how you're going to do that. But you're up to a lot yourself. So what do you have coming up, and how can they get a hold of you, the listener or the viewer?
Got it. So for those who are listening and viewing, I'm the only Jahmaal Marshall on LinkedIn, so you can always contact me there. Right now in the new year, we have our Mindset Master Method. You can actually go to that site. That's what my sales funnel is. If you want to sign up for that, I'm running a 2024 accelerator, which knocks off half the price. So for anyone who wants to jump in on that, enrollment is open right now, and we've already got 5 who are enrolled. I'm really excited to do work with in that area. Also doing corporate coaching, executive coaching with Carta and that organization. And of course, I'm still taking my one-on-one clients. The podcast is Listen and Speak, so you can always listen in if you want to get me interviewing other people. Uh, and later this year in Q3, digital products, just to give people something to, obviously I want to put something in people's hands. uh, and then I also do one-on-one mentoring, but those are just one-off, like hourly sessions, like for a specific thing where we actually will go through doing a time audit with you, um, doing an energy audit where we actually kind of examine what do your day-to-day look like and then send you off with a plan. So those are the things that are going on here in the new year, and I'm actually really excited about it. And I'm also co-authoring a book.
Oh, well, that list just gets longer. So thank you, Jahmaal, for that. Thank you for covering this episode, the burnout situation. It's something that plagues everybody. You're gonna find it. It's gonna come for you, and you just have to be ready. So thank you for covering all of that, folks. I want to remind you that today's episode is sponsored by Fantail Services and Superpass, which are powering our website and app, Southern Sweet and Sassy Coffee, The Outlier Project, and Duco. If you've enjoyed this episode and learned something interesting about the topic covered today, make sure to subscribe and let us know by leaving a comment right now. And we're always looking for new ideas and guests that we can add to our show. So if you know someone or have a topic that you would like featured on the podcast or want to sponsor our show, we love to hear about it by emailing us at triadleadershipsolutions@gmail.com. And this podcast is brought to you by StreamYard, a browser based tool that lets you live stream to any platform and record podcasts in studio quality and even host webinars. It's built for creators and video marketers to make your job way easier, and we use it to record this podcast. Be sure to tune in next week for another episode where we dissect leadership from another angle. And as we like to end the show, success to you.
Grace and peace.